School bus driver Harriet Moore never imagined that buying winter coats for cold students would lead to a fashion designer transforming her life, but that's exactly what happened on a bitter December morning when everything changed. The first snowfall of winter painted the small town of Millfield white, leaving crystal patterns on windows and turning breath into visible clouds. It was beautiful, unless you didn't have proper protection from the cold, a reality Harriet witnessed every morning from behind the wheel of Bus 17. Harriet pulled the yellow bus to a stop at the corner of Maple and Pine, the third pickup of her morning route. She watched through the large side mirror as the Tanner kids trudged toward the bus, their thin jackets clearly inadequate against the 20-degree morning. 11-year-old Eva's fingers were red and raw as she clutched her little brother Mateo's hand, guiding him through the snow. "Morning, Ms. Moore," Eva said, her voice cheerful despite the visible shiver running through her small frame. "Morning, sunshine," Harriet replied, forcing a smile that masked her concern. "Morning, Mateo." The 6-year-old boy nodded silently, his brown eyes large in his wind-reddened face. Harriet noticed he wore the same thin windbreaker he'd worn all autumn. No hat, no gloves, no scarf. This scene repeated at 4 more stops. The Johnson twins, the Rodriguez sisters, young Tyler Washington who lived with his grandmother, all of them underdressed for the harsh winter that had descended overnight. Harriet's hands tightened on the steering wheel as she navigated the familiar roads. At 57, she knew every pothole and turn of her route by heart, just as she recognized the signs of families struggling to make ends meet. 3 years ago, she'd been there herself, scraping by on her late husband Frank's medical bills after cancer took him and nearly everything they had. The bus heater pumped warm air, but Harriet knew it wasn't enough. Behind her, she heard the familiar sounds of children chatting, laughing, arguing, but underneath it all, the unmistakable sound of teeth chattering and hands being rubbed together for warmth. She glanced in the rearview mirror at her passengers. 23 children from the east side of Millfield, the part of town where rent was cheaper and life was harder. They were good kids, every last one of them. They deserved better than cold mornings and inadequate clothing. When Harriet pulled into the Millfield Elementary School drop-off lane, she made a decision. "Have a good day, everyone," she called as they filed past her. "Stay warm if you can. If you can." The words haunted her as she completed her morning route and parked the bus in the school district lot. Those 2 words contained all the impossible realities faced by the families she served. Her small apartment welcomed her with silence when she returned home. The modest 1-bedroom had been her refuge since selling the house she'd shared with Frank. Pictures of their life together still adorned the walls. Camping trips, their wedding day, holidays with friends who had gradually drifted away after Frank's death. The silence had become her constant companion. Harriet moved to her kitchenette and made a cup of tea, her mind still on those children shivering at their bus stops. She opened her laptop, a refurbished model Frank had insisted she learn to use in his final months, and pulled up her bank account. The numbers stared back at her. Not much, but enough to get by. Her Social Security check had come in yesterday, and her next paycheck from the school district would arrive in 2 weeks. She did some quick mental calculations. "Frank?" she whispered to the photo of her late husband on the counter. "What would you do?" The answer came easily. Frank, with his generous heart and practical mind, would have already been in the car. 2 hours later, Harriet's shopping cart at the discount store was filled with winter coats in various sizes. She'd selected the warmest ones she could find on clearance, thick, insulated, with hoods and pockets. 23 coats in total, 1 for each child on her route. The pile represented nearly her entire month's discretionary budget, but as she handed over her credit card, she felt lighter than she had in years. That night, she carefully removed tags and folded each coat, attaching small notes with names written in her neat penmanship. No need for the children to know where they came from. The giving was enough. The next morning arrived even colder than the previous day. Harriet stowed the box of coats behind her seat as she started her route, her heart beating with nervous anticipation. At the first stop, the Peterson boys climbed aboard with their usual rowdy energy. "Good morning, boys," Harriet said. "I found something with your names on it." She handed each of them a coat, navy blue for 12-year-old Devin, forest green for 10-year-old Aaron. Their confusion quickly turned to surprise, then delight as they slipped the warm coats over their thin sweatshirts. "Is this for real, Ms. Moore?" Devin asked, zipping up his coat with reverence. "For real," she confirmed. "Must be from Santa's early delivery service." At each stop, she repeated the process. Some children squealed with delight, others grew quiet with gratitude, a few even had tears in their eyes. By the time the Rodriguez sisters climbed aboard, word had spread, and they approached Harriet with wide, hopeful eyes. "These are for you," Harriet said, handing over a purple coat for 9-year-old Lucia and a red one for 7-year-old Isabel. "Gracias, Miss Moore," Lucia whispered, hugging the coat to her chest. When the bus reached the Tanner stop, Harriet's heart squeezed at the sight of Ava and Mateo, still drastically underdressed for the frigid morning. "I have something for you too," she said, retrieving their coats, teal for Eva, bright blue for Mateo. The look on their faces as they slipped into the warm garments was worth every penny she'd spent. "Who gave these to us?" Ava asked, her voice hushed with wonder as she helped Mateo with his zipper. "Someone who cares," Harriet replied simply. "Now hop on back, we don't want to be late." The bus that morning was transformed. Instead of the sound of shivering and subdued conversation, there was laughter and excitement. Children modeled their new coats for each other, compared colors, celebrated the warmth. Harriet drove with a smile she couldn't suppress, her rearview mirror reflecting a sea of bright colors and happy faces. She didn't notice the slender woman watching from the window of the modest house at the Tanner stop, didn't see the thoughtful expression on her face as she observed her children boarding the bus in brand new coats. The rest of the day passed in a pleasant haze for Harriet. She completed her afternoon route with the warm satisfaction of knowing her children, for that's how she thought of them, would sleep a little warmer tonight. What she didn't expect was the note passed to her by Eva Tanner as she stepped off the bus that afternoon. "My mom asked me to give you this," the girl said, pressing a neatly folded piece of paper into Harriet's hand before running to join her brother. Harriet waited until the bus was empty before unfolding the note. "Thank you for the coats. I would like to thank you in person. Coffee? Elena Tanner, Ava and Mateo's mom, 5550187. The simple message sent an unexpected flutter through Harriet's chest. She hadn't wanted recognition, had specifically avoided it. The thought of facing gratitude made her uncomfortable, as if it might diminish the purity of the gesture. Still, she found herself reaching for her phone that evening, sending a brief text to the number. "This is Harriet Moore, the bus driver. You're welcome for the coats. No thanks necessary." The response came almost immediately. "Please, Millfield Cafe tomorrow at 10 a.m.? I insist." Harriet's finger hovered over the keyboard. It had been so long since she'd socialized with anyone outside of work. Her world had contracted after Frank's death, shrinking to the dimensions of her bus route and her small apartment. The thought of sitting across from a stranger, making conversation, made her palms sweat. "Okay, 10 a.m., she pressed send before she could change her mind. The following morning, after completing her route, Harriet found herself sitting nervously at a small table in Millfield Cafe, fidgeting with a paper napkin. She'd changed out of her bus driver uniform into simple slacks and a blouse, had even applied a touch of lipstick, habits from before when she'd cared more about such things. "Ms. Moore?" Harriet looked up to find an elegant woman standing by her table. Elena Tanner was younger than Harriet had imagined, perhaps in her mid-30s, with the same large brown eyes as her children. She wore a simple black turtleneck and jeans, but something about the way the clothes fit suggested they weren't off-the-rack items. "Please call me Harriet," she said, rising to shake Elena's hand. "Elena," the younger woman replied with a warm smile. "Thank you for meeting me." The waitress came by, and they both ordered coffee. An awkward silence followed until Elena spoke again. "What you did for my children, for all the children, it was incredibly generous." Harriet felt heat rise to her cheeks. "It wasn't much. I just noticed they were cold." "It was everything," Elena said firmly. "Mateo has asthma that flares up in the cold. That coat might literally save him from a hospital visit this winter." The weight of those words settled over Harriet. She hadn't known about Mateo's condition. "I wish I could have done more," she admitted. "Better coats, maybe. But I wanted to get one for everyone, and—" "They're perfect," Elena interrupted gently. "More than perfect. But I need to explain something to you." Harriet looked at her questioningly. "I'm a fashion designer," Elena said. "Or at least I was back in New York. I worked for Emerson Cole for 8 years before." She trailed off, something shadowing her expression before she continued. "Before we moved here 6 months ago." "Emerson Cole?" Harriet repeated, the name vaguely familiar. "A high-end fashion house," Elena explained. "I specialized in outerwear, actually. Coats, jackets, that sort of thing." Understanding began to dawn on Harriet. "So you know I bought discount store coats. Elena laughed, a bright sound that transformed her face. That's not my point at all. My point is that I know quality construction when I see it, and you chose well with what you had. But more importantly, I want to repay your kindness. That's not necessary, Harriet began. I insist, Elena said. I've been freelancing since we moved here, designing for a few small labels remotely, but I've been wanting to start something local, something meaningful. Her eyes lit up as she continued. What if I made coats? Real, professional-grade winter coats designed specifically for children who need them? A community coat project. Harriet blinked, surprised by the direction of the conversation. That sounds wonderful, but I don't see how I need a partner, Elena said. Someone who knows the community, who cares about these children, someone who understands what they need, someone like you. The words hung between them, an unexpected invitation to step out of the small, quiet life Harriet had constructed for herself after Frank's death. I'm just a bus driver, she said softly. Elena's gaze was steady. You're the woman who spent what must have been a significant amount of money to keep 23 children warm. You're exactly who I'm looking for. That coffee meeting stretched to nearly 2 hours as Elena outlined her vision, a small workshop where she could design and produce coats specifically for children in need. She had the skills, the industry connections for materials, even a small amount of startup capital saved from her freelance work. What she needed was someone who knew which families needed help, someone who could handle the community outreach side of things. Think about it, Elena said as they parted. No pressure. But I think we could do something special together. Harriet drove home in a daze, her mind racing. The idea was compelling but terrifying. Since Frank's death, she'd carefully constructed a life of minimal risk and limited engagement, driving her route, returning to her quiet apartment, repeating the cycle day after day. The prospect of stepping into something new made her stomach churn with anxiety. That night, she found herself talking to Frank's photograph again. She wants me to help start some kind of coat charity, she told his smiling image. Me at my age. It's crazy, right? In the silence that followed, she could almost hear his response. Why not you, Hattie? Why not now? 3 days later, Harriet sent a text to Elena. I'm in. Let's try. What began as a simple act of kindness on a cold December morning evolved into something neither woman could have predicted. Elena converted her garage into a small workshop, filling it with a professional sewing machine, design tables, and rolls of waterproof, insulated fabric in vibrant colors. Harriet found herself spending evenings and weekends there, learning about patterns and materials, offering insights about the children's needs based on her daily observations. This one's too bulky for the younger kids, she would say, examining a prototype. They can't move their arms properly. Or, the Johnson twins are always losing their mittens. Could we design pockets to store them? Elena listened, adjusted, innovated. Together they created coats that were not just warm but practical, with reflective strips for safety during dark winter mornings, adjustable cuffs that could be lengthened as children grew, hidden pockets for bus passes or house keys. Word spread about their project. Elena's former colleagues in New York sent remnant fabrics from high-end collections. A local business offered to match donations. The school principal provided space for distribution events. By the following winter, Warm Roots, as they named their initiative, had produced over 100 coats for children in need throughout Millfield. For Harriet, though, the most profound transformation wasn't in the success of their project, it was within herself. The quiet, isolated existence she had accepted as her new normal gradually expanded. Her apartment filled with fabric swatches and design sketches. Her phone buzzed with texts from Elena about new ideas or community partners. Her weekends involved volunteering at coat distribution events rather than solitary TV watching. Most surprising was the friendship that developed between the two women. Despite their age difference and contrasting backgrounds, they discovered a shared sense of purpose and complementary strengths. Elena brought creativity and technical expertise. Harriet contributed practical wisdom and community knowledge. Together, they achieved what neither could have done alone. I never thought I'd find this again, Harriet admitted one evening as they sat in Elena's kitchen after a long day of production. Ava and Mateo had already gone to bed, and the house was quiet around them. Find what? Elena asked, cradling her tea. Purpose, Harriet said simply. After Frank died, I just existed. Drove the bus, came home, repeated. I thought that was all there was left for me. Elena reached across the table and squeezed Harriet's hand. Sometimes life surprises us when we least expect it. Like a fashion designer moving to a small town in the middle of nowhere, Harriet teased gently. Something flickered in Elena's eyes, that same shadow Harriet had noticed during their first coffee meeting. "Yes," she said softly. "Something like that." Harriet had sensed from the beginning that there was more to Elena's story than she had shared. The move from New York to Millfield wasn't a natural career progression for a successful designer. The occasional phone calls Elena took in private, her reluctance to appear in publicity photos for warm routes, the way she sometimes checked the locks twice before settling in for the evening, all hinted at something left unsaid. Harriet never pressed. She understood the sanctity of private pain, the right to reveal one's story in one's own time. Whatever had brought Elena and her children to Millfield, whatever shadows occasionally darkened her expression, were hers to share when and if she chose. As their second winter of partnership approached, Warm Roots had evolved beyond their initial expectations. They had expanded to include hats, gloves, and scarves in matching sets. Local media had covered their work, bringing in donations and volunteers. A neighboring town had reached out about starting their own chapter. It was after one such meeting with potential partners that Harriet noticed Elena's unusual silence on the drive home. "Everything all right?" she asked, glancing at her friend in the passenger seat. Elena nodded, then sighed. "Just thinking about how public this is all becoming. It's wonderful, but also frightening," Harriet supplied. Elena looked at her with surprise. "Yes, exactly. You don't have to tell me," Harriet said gently, "but I've suspected for a while that you're not just here for a change of scenery." The car filled with silence for several long moments before Elena spoke again, her voice quiet but steady. "My ex-husband, Marco. He was controlling, then abusive." Her hands twisted in her lap. "It started after Matteo was born. Small things at first, criticism, checking my phone, isolating me from friends. Then it escalated." Harriet kept her eyes on the road, giving Elena space to continue. "The last time he put me in the hospital. While I was there, a nurse connected me with a domestic violence organization. They helped us disappear. New town, new start, some basic support until I could establish myself." She took a deep breath. "He's still looking for us. His family has money, connections. And now our project is getting publicity." Harriet realized aloud. Elena nodded. "I've been careful. No photos, using only my first name in materials. But as we grow, we'll protect you," Harriet said firmly, a fierce protectiveness rising in her chest. "We'll figure it out." That conversation marked another evolution in their partnership. Security became a priority alongside their charitable mission. Harriet installed new locks on her apartment and Elena's house. They created protocols for the children's safety at school and on the bus. Warm Roots materials carefully omitted Elena's last name and used Harriet as the public face of the organization. Despite these shadows, their work continued to flourish. Elena's designs caught the attention of a sustainable fashion advocate with a large social media following. An anonymous donor provided funds for industrial sewing equipment. A vacant storefront on Millfield's main street became available at a reduced rent, a perfect location for a proper workshop and distribution center. On the day they signed the lease for the storefront, Harriet felt a mix of excitement and disbelief. At 60, when many of her contemporaries were settling into retirement, she was helping launch what amounted to a small business. "Are we crazy?" she asked Elena as they stood in the empty space, their voices echoing slightly. Elena laughed. "Probably, but the good kind of crazy." Harriet surveyed the space. Large windows facing the street, a back room perfect for production, even a small office area. "Frank would have loved this," she said softly. "He always believed in second acts." "He was right," Elena said, linking her arm through Harriet's. "This is definitely our second act." The grand opening of the Warm Roots workshop was scheduled for early October, perfectly timed for the approaching winter season. Volunteers helped paint walls, install shelving, and set up workstations. Elena's designs hung on display walls, no longer just functional children's coats, but expanded lines that included adult sizes, with proceeds from sales supporting the charitable distribution program. The night before the opening, Harriet stayed late, arranging the final displays and checking inventory. The transformation of the space mirrored her own internal journey, from empty and abandoned to purposeful and vibrant. As she locked up and walked to her car, the autumn air crisp around her, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. For a simple decision to buy coats for cold children, for Elena's unexpected entrance into her life, for second chances when she least expected them. The morning of the grand opening dawned bright and clear. Harriet arrived early, wearing one of Elena's designs, a deep burgundy coat with subtle tailoring that made her feel more elegant than she had in years. She unlocked the door, switched on lights, and prepared for the day ahead. When Elena arrived with Ava and Mateo 30 minutes later, her face was pale, her movements tense. "What's wrong?" Harriet asked immediately. Elena ushered the children toward the back room before responding in a low voice. "He called my cell phone this morning. Marco. I don't know how he got the number." Fear clutched at Harriet's chest. "What did he say?" "That he saw the article about worm roots in the regional newspaper. That he knows where we are now." Elena's hands trembled slightly. "I need to call my caseworker, maybe look at relocating again." "No," Harriet said firmly. "You've built something here. The children are settled. We'll find another way." The day proceeded with a surface normality that belied the tension underneath. Community members streamed in to admire the space and the products. Local officials cut a ceremonial ribbon. Volunteers served refreshments and helped with sales. Through it all, Harriet kept a protective eye on Elena and the children, scanning faces, watchful for anything unusual. As the afternoon wore on, a tall man in an expensive-looking coat entered the shop. Harriet's instincts immediately heightened. He moved with an air of confidence, surveying the space with critical eyes rather than the admiring glances of other visitors. When his gaze landed on Elena, who was demonstrating a sewing technique to a group of interested teenagers, something in his expression shifted. Recognition. Possession. Harriet moved without thinking, positioning herself between the man and Elena, pulling out her phone as she approached him. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice level despite the adrenaline coursing through her. The man's eyes flickered to her, dismissive. "I'm looking for my wife." "There's no one here by that description," Harriet replied steadily. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I don't think you understand who I am." "I understand perfectly, Mr. Tanner," Harriet said, emphasis on the last name making it clear she knew exactly who he was. "And I've already called the police. The restraining order is still in effect." Uncertainty crossed his face. He hadn't expected this level of preparation. Behind her, Harriet was aware of Elena quietly gathering the children and moving them to the office, where a volunteer was already on the phone with emergency services. "This doesn't concern you?" Marco said, his voice hardening. "This is between me and my family." "Your former family," Harriet corrected. "And it absolutely concerns me. Elena and those children are my family now too." The words came without planning, but as soon as she spoke them, Harriet recognized their truth. Somewhere along the way, Elena, Eva, and Mateo had become her family, not replacing Frank, but expanding her heart in ways she hadn't believed possible after his death. Marco took a step toward her, intimidation in his posture. Harriet didn't flinch. "You have 30 seconds to leave before the police arrive," she said calmly. "Your choice how this plays out." For a tense moment, the outcome hung in the balance. Then the sound of sirens in the distance seemed to decide him. With a last venomous glance, Marco turned and walked out, his rigid posture betraying his fury. Harriet's legs nearly buckled with relief. She made her way to the office where Elena clutched her children close, tears streaming down her face. "He's gone," Harriet assured them. "The police are coming. It's going to be okay." The rest of the day unfolded in a blur of police reports, security consultations, and community support. The grand opening celebration transformed into something else, a rally of protection around a family in need. Volunteers offered to escort Elena and the children home, to take shifts watching the house, to install security systems. That night, after the children were finally asleep in Harriet's spare bedroom where the family would stay temporarily, Elena and Harriet sat on the small balcony of the apartment, mugs of tea growing cold between them. "How did you know what to say to him?" Elena asked. "You weren't afraid at all." Harriet considered the question. "When Frank was sick, there was a moment when the doctor told us there was nothing more they could do. I thought fear would swallow me whole. But instead something else happened. I found this. Clarity. This certainty that I would make his remaining time as good as it could possibly be, no matter what." She looked at Elena in the dim light. "Today felt like that. Some things are simply non-negotiable. Your safety, the children's well-being. Those things matter more than fear." Elena's hand found hers in the darkness. "You called us your family." "You are," Harriet said simply. "If that's okay with you?" Elena's fingers tightened around hers. "More than okay." In the days that followed, practical matters took precedence. Marco was served with a reinforced restraining order. Security cameras were installed at the workshop and both homes. Police increased patrols in their neighborhoods. Slowly, a new normal established itself, more cautious than before, but refusing to be defined by fear. Warm Roots continued to grow, its mission expanding along with its reach. Elena's designs began attracting attention beyond their charitable purpose, with several boutiques requesting wholesale partnerships. Harriet discovered a talent for grant writing, securing funding that allowed them to hire staff and increase production. By the time winter arrived in full force, the workshop hummed with activity. Coats, hats, gloves, and scarves were distributed not just to Harriet's original bus route students, but to children throughout the county. Each item bore a small tag with their motto, "Warmth travels by many routes." On a snowy December evening, almost exactly 2 years after Harriet had first noticed her shivering passengers, she stood at the window of the workshop watching snowflakes dance in the glow of street lamps. Behind her, Elena was finishing a custom order, the soft whir of the sewing machine a comforting backdrop. "Penny for your thoughts?" Elena said, looking up from her work. Harriet smiled. "I was just thinking about how a simple bus route changed everything." "Not the route," Elena corrected gently. "The driver. Your compassion changed everything, Harriet." Harriet felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the workshop's efficient heating system. "We changed each other, I think." Elena nodded, setting aside her sewing to join Harriet at the window. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't bought those coats that day?" "I try not to," Harriet admitted. "The thought of never knowing you and the children. It's unimaginable now." They stood in companionable silence, watching the snow transform the world outside into something magical and new. Like their lives, Harriet thought, transformed by unexpected connections, by simple acts of kindness that expanded beyond all expectation. "Ready to head home?" Elena asked eventually. "Ava's making her famous hot chocolate tonight." Home. The word held new meaning now. No longer just Harriet's quiet apartment, but also Elena's house where she spent most weekends, the warmth of family dinners, the chaos of homework and bedtime stories, the sense of belonging she had thought lost forever after Frank's death. "Ready," Harriet replied, gathering her coat, one of Elena's special designs, made specifically for her, with hidden pockets for bus route maps and student information. As they locked up the workshop and stepped into the snowy evening, Harriet reflected on how a simple observation, children shivering at bus stops, had opened a door she never knew existed, how a small act of kindness had rippled outward, touching not just the recipients but returning to transform her own life in ways she could never have imagined. The school bus driver who bought winter coats for cold students had found, in that gesture, the route to her own renewal, a journey made possible by unexpected connection, by the courage to begin again, and by the endless ways that warmth travels between hearts brave enough to remain open to life's possibilities.